This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, welcome everyone. Bruchim Abam to our weekly share on Tefillah, sponsored by our friend in Los Angeles, Rabbi Salel Rose, Umishpachtoi, Aliyah Nishmas, his brother, Tzvi ben Levi Yitzchak, Neshama Shavar Aliyah, Abi Askel Tzedek. So this share is not only a share on Tefillah, but it's also in preparation of the upcoming trip to the holy city of Tzfas, and we're going to speak about two luminaries that graced that holy city. And they were two of the all-time great luminaries, namely Rabbi Yosef Karo, the Maran Bet Yosef, and the Arizal Rabbi Yitzchak Luria Ashkenazi. And the Beis Yosef is the sort of the father of halacha. He wrote the Kesef Mishnah on the Rambam, he wrote the Beis Yosef on the Torah, and then he codified it in the Shulchan Aruch. And of course the Ari was the greatest Mekubal. They lived simultaneously in Tzfas, even though the Beis Yosef lived much longer. The Beis Yosef lived from 1488 to 1575. So he lived something like 87 years. The Ari, on the other hand, lived from 1534 to 1572. He only lived 39 years. Amazingly. And the Ari's whole stint in Tzfas was less than 2 years. So they certainly crossed paths, and we're going to discuss today, is one greater than the other? Do we follow the opinion of one over the other? We're going to discuss, even though we're up to the bracha of Roika Ha'aretz Alamayim, we're just going to jump ahead a little bit for this week. We're going to speak about one of the later brachas, one of the penultimate bracha, Hanoisein Layoif Koach, God who gives the weary strength. And that's certainly something we're all grateful for. Most people, from the time they wake up in the morning until they hit the sack, they consider themselves yaif, weary, tired, and worn, and we constantly need God to gird us with strength and give us energy. Now, if you look in the Gemara Brachas, a list of various brachas we say, so number 3 on the sheet, the Gemara Brachas Samach and Beis, it says that when we wake up in the morning, we should say Lekai Neshama. And when you hear the voice of the rooster, you say Asher Nasan Lasavivina. And when you open your eyes, you say Pekach Ivrim. And when you sit up, you say Mater Asurim. When you wear clothing, you say Mal B'Sharumim. And when you stand tall, you say Zokef Kafufim. When you put your feet on the ground, Roikar Tzalmoyim. And when you walk, you say Amechem Mitzadei Gover. And when you put on your shoes, you say Shasli Kol Tzarki. And when you put on your belt, you say Sobekvura. And when you put on your hat, you say Oitar Yisrael B'Sefara. And that's all, folks. The Gemara does not say a word about Hanoise Layoif Koach. Now there's another Gemara Menachos that Reb Meir says, you say Shalaisani Goy, Shalaisani Aved, Shalaisani Isha. But where in Shas is the bracha Hanoisein Layoif Koach mentioned? It's not. There's no mention of that bracha in Shas. Where is it mentioned in the Mishnah? It's not. Where is it mentioned in the Medrash? It's not. Where is it mentioned? It's not mentioned nowhere. It is not mentioned in any classical Makar. Yeah, and therefore the Shulchan Aruch brings in number 4. But before we see number 4, let's go to the Beis Yosef right away. Number 15. Number 15, the Beis Yosef says, Oid bracha achas yesh b'sidurei Ashkenaz, hanoisein layoif koyach, v'niskina al sha'adam mafkin nishmasai ba'erav. Af al pi sheyesh smach yafel levarach bracha zu, even though there might be some kind of basis to say this bracha. Me'achar shaloi nizkara b'talmud, since it's not mentioned in the Gemara, I don't know anyone has permission to enact it. I found that the Agor writes that there are those who challenge this bracha. That you don't say the blessing because it's not mentioned in Shas. You can't just do things that are not mentioned in Shas. Look in this, and therefore the Shulchan Aruch writes, Yesh noegin levarich hanos aliyav koach ve'ein devreim nirin. It is not correct. And therefore, let's jump for a moment. We're getting good at jumping. In number 12. What did the Gra do? Of course the Gra didn't say it. It's not mentioned in the Gemara. Says the Tosfos Masarav, Shamati b'Yachor Rabbi Yaakov Kohana, Shaloi Barach B'Rosh Hashanah Yav Koyach, Kiloi Niskar b'Gemara, V'Amar Ki Ein Koyach B'Yadin L'Chadesh Bracha Midateinu. You can't make up a new blessing.
Where did it come from? Did they say?
Exactly. So you know how to say it.
Do we know where it came from?
Comes the Ramah, and the Ramah says, Haga Achaminug Pasha B'Vnei Ashkenazim La'amroi. The Ashkenazim say it.
They're more true nusach.
Comes the Pri Chadash. Pri Chadash was Chizkiyahu di Silva. He was a Rav in Europe. He was offered the most prestigious position of his time, and that is to be the rabbi in Amsterdam, on condition that he wouldn't tell the people what to do. So he said, adios amigos. And he lost the job. And the Chidah writes about him, how fortunate he was that he would not take a position just for money, if he couldn't reprimand the people. Anyway, the Pri Chadash says, Upai Yerushalayim Tibaneh b'mhera b'yameinu, amen, nispashet aminig la'amrai. I'm at number 6 now. The Pri Chadash says, in Jerusalem, the minhag has spread to say it, Al pi kisvei shal harav HaKadosh Mari Ashkenazi, Zulasi k'tzas yechid, only a few guys who don't say it. But she'ein amroi say, V'ani echa mehem, and I'm one of those few guys. Because it doesn't say it in the Gemara. Comes the Magen Avraham. The Mechaber says not to say it. Uveknesses hagdoila kasav chacham echad heyed shechazar harav Beis Yosef v'soif yama v'tziva la'omroi b'shemu malchus. After the Beis Yosef wrote the book, he changed his mind. Now again, this is what the Knesset Hagdolah says. So my whole life, until about a year ago, I always wondered, that's nonsense. How could you say he changed his mind? Then he would have told us about it. If you would know how hard it is to publish one word, then you would understand that it's not such a big kasha, then how come we don't know about it? To get a book out is... Okay?
Did you ever find a manuscript that he wrote that...
You mean a piece of paper?
Yeah.
No.
How does he know he changed his mind? What's his source? Anybody could say he changed his mind. Gotta have some source.
A Chacham Echad was made that he changed his mind.
Oh, Chacham Echad, okay.
Again, you call that heresy, right?
Shnei Edom, you come right?
But the Magen Avram said, the Knesset Hagdolah says, I protest not to change the early minhag, to say it without Shem Malchus. Who says to say it though? So in other words, so far we have the Gemara doesn't bring it down, and therefore there are those who challenge it, and therefore the Shulchan Aruch says what? Don't say it. And somebody claims that the Mechaber changed his mind at the end of his life, but who says yes to say it? Uve kavanas kasav la'imrai. The Arizal says to say it. Dun 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 dun. Now we have our what?
Did Ramah say anything about that?
The Ramah says the Ashkenazim say it. But we want to know, but who says to say it? The Ari. So here we have a beautiful case where the Shulchan Aruch writes not to say it. Beis Yosef writes not to say it. The Gra didn't say because not in the Gemara, but most people say it. The Pri Chadash wouldn't say it. But where is it based on to say it? The Arizal.
What is that word?
Uve kavanos. When the Magen Avraham quotes the kavanos refers to the kavanos of the Ari. So if custom seems to be that we say it, what does that tell you about the authority of the Arizal vis-a-vis the Shulchan Aruch? First of all, if the whole source of saying it is the Ari, and we say it, that seems to indicate that when in the rink, when the Ari and the Mechaber get into the rink, whatever the Ari says, we follow the Ari. Comes the Chidah, that's right, that's how it works. Says the Chidah in the Berkei Yosef, Yesh Noagim, this is a good share for Tzfas, right? Mechaber of Tzfas against the Ari in Tzfas. This is a good share for the Arizal Shul. I don't know if I can post this. Hopefully they won't listen to it. Okay, so Ata nispashet haminug beglilasenu levarech zois habracha. Says the Chida, it is widespread in our communities to make the blessing. Anos of Koach al pi kisser Rabbeinu Arizal. I after kibalnu hayrois maran. But we've accepted the psakim of Maran. Who's Maran? The Beis Yosef. Kimalon, we hold the Ilmale Maran Afhura Das Kadosh Hari. Had the Beis Yosef seen what the Ari wrote, Gamhu Yoidel Bracha, he would also be Moideh. The Ari was so great that the Beis Yosef would never argue on him. If he would have seen what the Ari wrote, he also would have been Machni Adas. And especially in light of the Knesset Agdola, who writes that he heard from someone at the end of the Beis Yosef's life, he was Chayzer. And therefore, that is the correct practice. Don't, to say it with Shemo Malchus, not like the Pri Chadash. Now, that's a pretty wild statement, that the Chida is going out on the line and he's saying that if the Beis Yosef would have seen what the Ari wrote, the Beis Yosef would have changed his mind. Now look what the Chida writes about this in the Sefer Toivayin. The Chida writes in the Toivayin Siman Zayin that one who follows the Nusach of the Ari is doing correctly, because to him was revealed all secrets, and had the masters of the other Nusach known that the Ari favored his Nusach, they would have accepted it with love. Look what he writes in the second paragraph. Even though it's a very new bracha. Umaran b'shulchan aruch nidche karila, and the Shulchan Aruch dismisses it. Why? Demeyacher de Rabbeinu Ari kasav sheish amra. Since the Ari says say it, upiresh soida, and he explains the secret. Kein roi lasois. Devada ilu maran yada migdulas Ari. Because if the Beis Yosef would have known about the greatness of the Ari, v'shehu amar l'amar, that the Ari says to say it, kein haya avid of the menafshi, he would have followed that. Let God forgive the Pri Chadash, who said that there are only a few people who don't follow the Ari, and I'm one of them. How could the Pri Chadash not follow the Ari? But we know often the Pri Chadash explains many sugyas in Shas based on the presumptions of the Ari. So I don't understand. How could it be to someone who's familiar with the writings of the Ari that he doesn't follow it? Okay, so the Chida basically is saying that if the Beis Yosef would have known about the godless of Ari, he too would have followed suit. Now look in the next page. Now here's where the Chida really heads it on. Va'ani ba'ani. I in my poverty. Page 2. Oimer, I say, ki Rabbeinu ho'ari kol haneflois hashagila hayabachaf beis chadashim. All of his revelations were over the course of 22 months. V'hayu talmidav ma'alimin devarav. His students hid his words uv'sasum chachma. Meaning, it's not like when the Ari taught something, it was well spread. They concealed it. The Megala Tefach Mechasa Tefachayim, the students of the Arizal hid everything he said. So even his contemporaries were not aware of everything he said. Umaran Ushar Harabanim Lo Yadu Echa Mimea Migdulasai. They didn't know even 100th of the greatness of the Ari.
Why did the students hide it?
Because he told them to. The Hein Ba'avoy Noch Nafshe, and then because of the sins of the generation, the Ari died. Bimei Maran, in the lifetime of Maran. And it could be the Maran found out about it after he died and he retracted. This is what I wrote, that had the Beis Yosef and the masters of the other Nusach known about the Nusach L'Ari, they would have retracted. This is what we call Hadar Hu L'chol Chasidav. They would retract in deference to the righteous ones. Anyway, this is the opinion of the Chida. Even the Knesset Hagdola was not aware of the greatness of the Chida and his wisdom. of the Ari, right? And I don't think he mentions him in his Svarim except for in a few places. And that's why he yells and shouts at those who make the bracha. Because since the Ari knew about, in other words, the Ari knew what the Beis Yosef wrote. The Ari saw the Beis Yosef. He knew the Beis Yosef said not to say it, and he still said to say it. It must be Vadai Kein Roy Linoig. And he knew it's not in Shas. And he still said to say it. Even though it's against the Shas and it's against the Shulchan Aruch. So the bottom line is, says the Chidah, the principle that whenever you have the Ari against the Beis Yosef, you follow the Ari. Why? Because if the Beis Yosef would have known about what the Ari said and the greatness of the Ari, he would have been Maida. This is one of the central principles of the Chidah. Now, I'll show you the Ben Ish Chai also in principle agrees to this issue in the following case. What's the halacha if you're in doubt whether you should make a bracha or not? Safek bracha is lahaka. What if the Shulchan Aruch says you should make the bracha, but it's a safek? Some poskim say not. So the rule of the Ben Ish Chai is safek brachos lahakel, even against das maran. Even when the Mechaber says make a bracha, the Ben Ish Chai says safek brachos lahakel applies even against the Shulchan Aruch. But what if the Arizal says to make a bracha and it's safek bracha? Not against the Ari. Against the Ari, we don't apply safek brachos lahakel. That's the
passed away before the Maran, right?
Yes. So the Ari passed away in 1572. And the Mechaber passed away in 1575.
Do we have any indication of the Maran acknowledging that? Did he see any of the works after he?
I don't think so. And I think Dari. I don't think Dari let him in the circle. He was the Mechaber was not in the inner circle of the Ari's students.
Even after he passed away, he didn't acknowledge after he saw his works.
Well, he probably finished publishing his works before he passed away. What's very interesting to me, just as a complete side note, is that the Shulchan Aruch was born in 1488 in Spain. So as a 4-year-old, he was exiled from Spain in the Spanish Inquisition, which is interesting. Anyway, comes Rabbi Vadia Yosef, and Rabbi Vadia surprisingly takes on the Chidah. And he argues on the Chidah, and he dismisses the Chidah's principle that if the Beis Yosef would have known what the Ari said, he would have been Kairea u'mishtachave, and he would have bowed and he would have agreed. And Rabbi Vadia says, Mehechi teisi. Look at number 13. Rabbi Vadia says, V'nei b'makom sherabanei ha'mekubalim soivrim hefech divrei ha'poskim. When the Kabbalists hold the opposite of the poskim, as this is the case here, where the Mekubalim say Hanois and Le'av Koach, and the poskim say seemingly don't say it. Lo yatsa hadar midei Machlokes. There's a big dispute. Should you paskin like the Mekubalim? And we know the Chidah said we follow the Ari. That even though we paskin like Maran, but nevertheless we say that if Maran would have seen the Ari, he would have been Chayzer. And the Chidah repeats this a second time in the Toivayin, that the Maran didn't know even 100th of the greatness of the Ari. And by the way, the Stechemed also agrees that way, and the Ben Ish Chai agrees that way, that even though we don't say Safek Brachas Lahakel, even though we say Safek Brachas Lahakel against Maran, we don't say it against Ari. But look in the bottom line of number 13. This is one of my favorite lines ever written in the history of the world. Ready? I love this. Va'anoichi ba'anyi lo zachisi lahavin minalan l'rabanan hanal umdinazu b'das maran.
Where does that start?
The 2 lines in the bottom of number 13. You see that?
Yeah.
Reb Jack, yeah? You see that? Va'anoichi ba'anyi, and I in my poverty. Lo zachisi lahavin, I have not merited to understand. How do these rabbis, how are they so confident in the opinion of Maram, that if he would have seen the Ari, he would have been moided to the Ari. With all due respect to the Arizal, actually, says the Rabbi Vadia, kavod to everybody. What's special about the Ari more than any other posek? What? Because he knew what God held? Who cares? Lo bashamayim hi. Torah is not in the heavens. Torah is down here in this world. And how do you have a right to forsake the acclaimed poskim and to follow the Ari like halacha l'Moshe Sinai? Doesn't the Rambam write that a Navi who paskins something misvara? Meaning, let's say like this. We have a Machlokes ha-poskim. Yeshaya HaNavi against the Chazon Ish. You ready for this? Yeshaya HaNavi against the Chazon Ish. Now Yeshaya HaNavi is not telling Nevuah. He's saying Psak, Misvara. Who do we follow? They're equal. They're equal. But he's a Navi. That doesn't do anything for his Psak. Doesn't add to his Psak. What about 1,000 Nevi'im like Eliyahu and Elisha? They hold one way. And 1,000 Chachamim the other way. Achrei Rabim Lahatos. We follow, in other words, let's say like this. You have 1,000 Nevi'im versus 1,001 Chachamim. You follow 1,001 Chachamim. So says the Rabbi Vadia Memkein, Afim Rav Guvrei B'Chel Rabbeinu Ari Kachad Kamaya. Even if the Arizal is like one of the Rishonim, one of the earliest Nevi'im. But we have Rishonim, L'Roiv, who disagree, we follow the Roiv. Secondly, says Rabbi Vadia, now this is awesome. This is awesome, Sheba awesome, Sheba awesome. Not everything that Ari writes are we so confident that it came from Eliyahu Navi. Who says so? The Baal HaTanya quotes the Gra. You hear this? The Baal HaTanya quotes the Gra. Look at number 10. In the letter of the Baal HaTanya, he says, V'yadu alanu bebeiror gamor shahagoyin ha'chased einoi mamin b'kabbalas Ari b'chlala shu kula mipi Eliyahu. Now you'll say like this, look, if we knew when the Ari said, make the bracha, it came from Elijah, Elijah's a big posek. Because he learned directly from his Rabbi, Achi Hashilon, he learned from Moshe Rabbeinu. And the Beis Yosef was well down the line. But we do not accept that everything that Ari said was from Eliyahu. Some things he said on his own. And therefore you don't have to accept it. And that's what Reb Chaim Volozhiner writes. So what's this big rush? Oh, the Ari said it, so then everybody else has to bow. Mehechitesi. Why do you have to listen to the Ari? You know, Rav Moshe Feinstein writes in a tshuva, the Arizal is only ke'echad min ha-poskim. He's only like one of the poskim. Okay. Furthermore, says Rabbi Vadia, that I wrote in the Shalsa Tshuvas min ha-shamayim of Rabbi Yaakov Mimorush, that, you know, one of the Balei HaTosfos would send shilas to the Shamayim. He knew how to send letters to Shamayim. Which, by the way, sometimes you could get them there quicker than to get it, you know, to Flatbush or something.
Use Twitter.
Yeah.
Goes very quickly. So
says Rabbi Vadia, I say Loi B'Shema, we don't follow it. And the Chidah says that if the Beis Yosef would have seen the Shalsa Tshuvas min ha-shamayim, he would have passed in that way. And I said Mehechi Tesi there also. And I found many Achronim that challenged the Chidah. So the same way they challenged the Chidah, who says that the Beis Yosef would have agreed with Shalsa Tshuvas min ha-shamayim, we'll say the same thing regarding the Ari, that we say Loi B'Shamayim hi. And then I found in the Sefer Oirach Ne'eman, look at number 11. Reb Menachem Nosson Auerbach. And the Oirach Ne'eman wants to say that had the Ari been the only one to say you should make the bracha of Anosein Layov Koach, we wouldn't make it. It's only because there are also reports that the Beis Yosef in fact was Chayzer. But had there not been these reports by the Knesset HaGdolah that the Beis Yosef himself was Chayzer, we wouldn't make it just because the Ari says to make it. Now, when the Pri Chadash says that the minhag spread because of the Ari, except for a few people, and I'm one of them, and the Chidah asks, how does he have a right to not follow the Ari? Very easy. Of course he doesn't follow the Ari. It's Loi B'Shamayim hi. And he didn't hear that the Maran was Chayzer of Hadar Hu L'Chol Chasidav. And I also found Harav Hagoyin Rav Sameach Gajian. You related? He also held this way, and he was matmiah on the Chida. How do you have this presumption that if the Beis Yosef would have seen the Ari, he would have paskin? What do you mean? Safek brachas lahakel. And the Gra himself didn't make the bracha. And the Shalshuv's Hain Yosef didn't make the bracha.
So how did it become so common that we make the bracha?
So now the question is, but we make the bracha. So doesn't that mean that Klal Yisrael have accepted the Ari upon them? So he already said, number one, because there's evidence that the Beis Yosef himself was chayzer. But now Rabbi Vadia turns to...
God doesn't accept it, even though the Beis Yosef was chayzer.
So now the Rabbi Vadia turns... Yeah, he's a big gun. But now the Rabbi Vadia turns to address this question, but doesn't the fact that Klal Yisrael make the bracha mean that we're giving priority to the Ari over the Beis Yosef? So Rabbi Vadia gives 3 suggestions of how the Jewish practice of making the bracha does not necessarily indicate the prominence of the Arizal over the Beis Yosef. Number 1, says Rabbi Vadia. Look at number 19. Ibra sha'achshav noagu hakol levarich berachas hanoisen layav koach. But it's not necessary to say that they're noig this way based on the Ari. You know why? Says Rabbi Vadia. Because Ashkenazim also make the bracha, even though many Ashkenazim don't always follow the Ari, carte blanche. So if the Ashkenazim are making it, it's not because of the Ari. It must be why. Number 1, says Rabbi Vadia, the Rishonim say to say it. There are Rishonim who say to say it. Namely the Smag, the Machsavitri, the Avudraham, the Tur, and the Ramah. Now look in the Smag. Here's an example where the Smag, the Rav Moshe Mikusi, I think. Number 14, in the list of Birchas HaShachar, the Smag brings the Hanoisen Layoiv Koach. So what's the pshat in the... Now we could ask, how does it help that the Rishonim say to say it? The Gra wouldn't say it, it's not in the Gemara. So says Rabbi Vadia, you have to say one of 2 things. Either some Rishonim did have the Gersa in the Gemara, and that is mentioned in the Bach in number 16. Alma diika nuschais the Garsi la betalmud, ve'iska nuschais the loy Garsi. There must have been some Gersais in the Gemara. Meaning this is not, the reason why we say it is not because we're following Kabbalistic practice over the Psak Halacha. It must be there was a legitimate Gersa of Hanoisen Layoiv Koach. Or number 2, says Rabbi Vadia, you could say like the Tzemach Tzedek of Lubavitch said. And that is, he says, even though it's not in the Gemara, it's a Takanas Ge'oinim.
Which Ge'oinim? Didn't...
Again, meaning the Ge'oinim of the sages right after the Talmud. So it is a very early Takana. It's not in the Talmud, but it is in the Ge'oinim. Look at number 17.
Rabbi, the one that those that say that the Girsa of the Gemara was that you say it.
Right.
Did they find any Gemaras that actually... Are they just easy to say it's a Girsa? Do you have a Gemara that actually shows that Girsa?
No, but the Bach proves that there must have been such a Gersa. Yeah? If you look at number 17, Shal Shuv Tzemach Tzedek, V'nei oid motzinu lahaga'oinim shetiknu kama brachos b'shem omachos achar chasimas hashas. And one of them, he says, is Hanoisen Layoiv Koach. By the way, and Rabbi Vadia quotes Ishal Avram Abuchach, that any bracha that has been customary to be said, there's no chshash bracha levatala. And therefore he says, that's why the minhag is to say the bracha of Hanoisen Layoiv Koach. And let's just end off where Rabbi Vadia quotes one more interesting source here. That says Rabbi Vadia, the last word on the line is Vishuv, about 14 lines from the end. Vishuv matzasi gamkin lahagoin pesach advir Shekasav she'af hachida yesh loy mishloi kasav kein ela gabe berchas hanois and le'ev koach mishum she'af maran chazer bar b'soif yamav. Meaning, even the Chida himself is not so confident to say that we follow the Arizal carte blanche against the Beis Yosef. It's only in conjunction with this additional possibility that the Beis Yosef himself was Maida. So, what I want to bring out is we have two great luminaries in our history that lived contemporaneously, and they knew about each other, but they didn't necessarily know about the greatness one of the other. Certainly the Beis Yosef did not know all of the greatness of the Ari. And they lived simultaneously in the same little neighborhood.
And they didn't know about each other?
They knew each other good, but the Beis Yosef was not invited in the inner circle of the Arizal. The Ari taught other Talmidim. And the Beis Yosef writes not to say Hanois and Layoiv Koach. And the Arizal says yes to say Hanois and Layoiv Koach. And Jewish practice is yes to say it. And those who, their stream of practice is to follow Mikubalim, cite this as a proof that we see the Kabbalistic practice overrides halachic practice. And those who follow halacha say it's not a proof because it doesn't mean necessarily, and the Kabbalistic stream is based on the Chida, that if the Arizal, if the Beis Yosef would have known about the greatness of the Arizal, he would have been Moideh. And Rabbi Vadia rejects that. He doesn't say that there is such a presumption, and the reason why we follow the custom of saying it is either because perhaps the Beis Yosef himself did retract, and that is either because there is a legitimate gersa in the Gemara, or and we know it is found in the Rishonim, or this is a takanas haga'inim. But today, in the Sephardic world, there are two streams, and namely the stream of Rabbi Yosef to follow Shulchan Aruch and Halacha primarily, and you have the stream of more Ben Ish Chai, Rav Yaakov Hillel, to follow the Mekubalim. And by the way, you have the same two streams in the Ashkenazic world. You have the Yeshiva world, that they follow Shulchan Aruch, they follow the Mishnah Berurah, they follow Divrei HaPoskim, and then in the world of Chasidus, the Arizal is given more prominence in a certain sense. But anyway, this is a...
Everybody says it today, no?
Yes, but the question is why, right? The question is why. Anyway, Rabbi Beis, wishing everyone, the Rebbe Shem should give all the Ayefim Koach, the Rebbe Shem should be Ma'azaros, Begvura, Shkoyach, have a good Shabbos.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.